He slammed the door so hard the glass rattled in its frame. "You're not welcome here," my son Miles said, his voice loud enough for every neighbor on the street to hear. His wife Paige stood behind him like a security guard, arms folded across her chest, eyes cold and satisfied. The porch light flickered above me, casting shadows across my face as I stood there holding a casserole dish I'd made for their dinner. My cheeks burned with humiliation. My palms started trembling, not from the November cold, but from the shock of being turned away from a house I'd been paying for quietly for 5 years. "You don't belong in our life anymore," Miles added, his voice dropping to something crueler, more final. Then the chain slid across the latch with a metallic scrape that seemed to echo through my chest. I stood frozen on that porch, staring at the brass key still hanging on my keyring, the same key I'd used to unlock this door the day I signed the purchase papers. "My name is Leah Bram, and I don't fight with screams or tears. I fight with receipts." If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has traveled. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, barely seeing the road through the blur of shock and anger. The casserole dish sat cold in the passenger seat, mocking me. When I got to my apartment, I went straight to my bedroom closet and pulled down the fireproof box I kept on the top shelf. Inside was everything I'd been organizing for years. The trust deed with Bram Family Living Trust, printed clearly at the top. Insurance statements showing my name as the policy holder. Tax bills stamped paid, every single one covered by my checking account. The house was never in Miles' name. It never had been. I'd bought it after his father walked out on us, placed it into the trust, and let my son live there rent-free while he got on his feet after college. That was 5 years ago. He'd mistaken my grace for ownership. My kindness for weakness. I spread the documents across my kitchen table and photographed each one with my phone. Then my email pinged. An automated message from the HOA. Subject line, violation notice, unauthorized sublet reported. I opened the email with growing dread. 3 violation notices had been issued to the property address over the past 4 months. Noise complaints. Unauthorized parking. Evidence of short-term rentals being operated from the guest bedroom. None of these notices had ever been forwarded to me, even though I was listed as the trust owner with the HOA. I scrolled through my text messages and found one from my neighbor Carol from 2 weeks ago that I'd been too busy to follow up on. She'd sent Ring doorbell footage showing strangers with suitcases going in and out of the house at midnight. "Thought you should know what's happening at your place," her message said. My place. Not Miles' place. Carol knew the truth even if my son had forgotten it. I forwarded the HOA email to myself and saved Carol's video to my cloud storage. Then I checked my banking app and my heart stopped. There was a credit inquiry from Pacific Northwest Credit Union dated 3 days ago. Someone had applied for a home equity line of credit against my property. The next morning I drove to the credit union before work. The branch manager, a woman named Donna Kim, pulled up the application on her computer screen and turned the monitor toward me. There was my name typed neatly on the applicant line. But the signature beneath it made my stomach drop. The loops were wrong. The pressure was uneven. Someone had tried to forge my signature and hadn't even done a good job of it. "This isn't my signature," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "I never applied for this." Donna's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "I'll need to start a fraud investigation," she said, pulling out a packet of forms. "And I'll need documentation proving you're the owner of record." I pulled the trust deed from my purse and slid it across her desk. She made copies, attached them to the file, and handed me a letter on bank letterhead confirming that Bram Family Living Trust was the verified owner. Then she lowered her voice and glanced toward the door. "Mrs. Bram," she said quietly, "someone called yesterday asking when they could come back to finish the application. They're planning to return tomorrow with a notarized letter of authorization." I left the credit union and drove straight to the law office of Armand Vega, an attorney I'd worked with years ago when setting up the trust. His assistant squeezed me in between appointments. I laid out everything. The door slam. The HOA violations. The forged credit application. Armand listened without interrupting, taking notes in his neat handwriting. When I finished, he looked up and said, "This is straightforward legally, but it's going to hurt emotionally. Are you ready for that?" I nodded. He drafted 2 documents that afternoon. First, a notice to cease and desist any unauthorized use of my name or property. Second, a formal notice of interest filed with the county recorder's office to block any future attempts to refinance, sell, or encumber the property. Then he prepared the hardest document, a 30-day notice revoking Miles' license to occupy the house. "We'll have this delivered by a neutral third party," Armand said. "Not you. Keep it clean and legal." I signed everything with a hand that didn't shake. My phone buzzed as I left his office. Miles was calling. I let it ring. That night I opened the family group chat on my phone. It was a thread that included me, Miles, Paige, and my daughter Simone, who lived 2 states away. I hadn't checked it in days. I scrolled up and my chest tightened. Paige had posted a photo of my front porch from the night I'd been turned away. The caption read, "When toxic people don't take the hint." Below it were messages from Miles agreeing, saying I needed to let go and stop keeping him small. Simone had defended me, but she'd been outnumbered. I didn't type a response. Instead, I took screenshots of everything and saved them to a folder labeled evidence. Then a new notification appeared. A voice note from Paige, 47 seconds long. I almost deleted it without listening. But something made me press play. Her voice came through, casual and confident, like she was chatting with a friend. "Once the refi clears, she's out for good," Paige said. "She has no idea what's coming. Miles' mom acts like she owns everything, but we're taking control now. My parents are ready to help us buy her out. This house is ours." 2 nights later I attended the monthly HOA meeting in the community clubhouse. I hadn't planned to go, but the violation notices gave me a reason. When my turn came, I stood and introduced myself calmly to the board. "I'm Leah Bram, owner of the property at 428 Cypress Lane," I said. "I've received notices regarding violations at that address, and I want to make it clear that I am the owner of record, not the current occupant. Going forward, all correspondence should be directed to me." The board president, a retired teacher named Glenn Vasquez, looked surprised. "We were under the impression your son owned the property," he said. "That's what he told us when he applied to rent out the guest room." I handed Glenn a copy of the trust deed. "He has a license to occupy," I said. "He does not have ownership, and he does not have permission to sublet." The mood in the room shifted. Glenn made notes and promised to update their records. Then he paused and said, "Mrs. Bram, we've also received a complaint filed by your son. He claims you've been harassing him and trespassing on his property." I sat in my car after the meeting and let the memories flood back. Miles at 10 years old, building Lego cities on our kitchen table while I worked double shifts as a medical secretary to keep us fed. His father had walked out the year before, leaving us with nothing but debt and a restraining order I never had to use because he never came back. I remembered Miles graduating high school, getting accepted to college, struggling to find his path. I'd bought that house with money I'd saved and a small inheritance from my mother. I bought it so Miles would have stability, a foundation to build his life on. I'd never asked him for rent. Never demanded he contribute to repairs or property taxes. I'd given him grace because that's what mothers do. But somewhere along the way, grace had turned into entitlement. My phone buzzed with a text from Nadia Cole, the property manager Armand had recommended. Notice delivered. Accepted by Paige at 4:47 p.m. Occupant refused to sign acknowledgement but could not refuse service. Clock starts now. 3 days later Miles showed up at my apartment complex. I heard him before I saw him, shouting in the parking lot about how I was ruining his life and trying to make him homeless. Neighbors opened their doors and peered out. I walked downstairs calmly and found him standing beside his truck, face red with anger. "You want to talk?" I asked. "Come upstairs." "No audience." He refused. Said he wouldn't step foot in my place when I'd just kicked him out of his. "It was never yours, Miles," I said quietly. "It was always mine." He called me controlling, manipulative, bitter. Said I couldn't stand to see him happy. I didn't argue. I pulled out my phone and texted him the scanned trust deed, the tax bills, the insurance statements. Everything that proved what I already knew. He stared at his phone screen, scrolling through the documents, his expression shifting from anger to confusion. Then his phone buzzed with a photo from Paige. I saw it before he could turn the screen away. It was a printed letter with an official-looking seal at the bottom, dated 2 days earlier, with my forged signature authorizing the refinance. Armand called the notary whose stamp appeared on Paige's letter. Her name was Monica Herrera, and she worked out of a small office near the credit union. Monica's voice went cold when Armand described the document. "I never notarized anything for those people," she said. "I keep detailed logs. If my stamp was used, it was stolen or forged." We filed a fraud report with the county and attached specimen signatures showing the clear difference between my real signature and the one on Paige's letter. Armand drafted an additional notice warning Miles and Paige that continued attempts to forge documents or encumber the property could result in criminal charges. I felt sick thinking about how far Paige had gone, and how Miles had let her. That evening Paige posted a photo on her social media story. It showed a shiny new lock being installed on the front door of the house. The locksmith's company logo was visible on his shirt. The caption read, "New locks, new boundaries, new life." Nadia moved quickly. She contacted the locksmith company and explained that the person who hired them did not own the property and had no legal authority to change the locks. She emailed them a copy of the trust deed and my identification. The locksmith, a man named Tony Ruiz, called her back within an hour. He sounded embarrassed and angry. "Lady told me she owned the place," he said. "She showed me mail with the address on it. I had no idea." Tony canceled the job and forwarded Nadia the text messages Paige had sent him, including her request to make sure the old owner can't get in anymore. Nadia added those messages to our growing file. That night Miles texted me for the first time since the parking lot confrontation. His message was short and brutal. "If you push this any further, you'll never see me again. You'll lose your son over a stupid house. Is that what you want?" I stared at those words for a long time. Then I typed back, "I love you, Miles. I always will. But I won't be bullied or defrauded. You can live there under the license you signed, or you can leave. That's your choice." For the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace. I'd drawn a line. I'd said the thing I needed to say. Love didn't mean letting people hurt me. Love didn't mean allowing my son and his wife to steal from me, forge my signature, and treat me like I was disposable. I slept better that night than I had in months. The next morning Nadia called with bad news. The HOA had doubled the fines for continued short-term rentals at the property. Guests had been seen coming and going over the weekend, and neighbors had complained about noise past midnight. The total owed was now over $4,000. "They're ignoring every warning," Nadia said. At this point, the HOA can place a lien on the property if the fines aren't paid within 30 days. I authorized Nadia to pay the fines on my behalf and add them to the accounting of what Miles owed me. Every dollar spent was another receipt. Another piece of proof. Another nail in the case I was building, not out of spite, but out of necessity. A week later I met Paige's mother, Denise, for coffee. She'd reached out through Facebook, saying she wanted to clear the air. I agreed to meet her at a neutral cafe downtown. Denise arrived 10 minutes late, ordered an elaborate latte, and smiled at me like we were old friends. She talked about Miles and Paige's future, their plans to start a family, how much they loved their house. Every time she said their house, I felt my jaw tighten. It's actually my house, I said finally. It's held in a trust that I control. Denise's smile faltered. Well, Paige said the refinance was going through and that you'd agreed to sign it over. I never agreed to anything, I said. And the refinance failed because my trust blocked it. Denise looked confused, then defensive. She leaned forward and lowered her voice. Paige said you were trying to control Miles, that you couldn't let him grow up. Then she said something that made everything click into place. We were going to use the equity from the house to help my husband's shop. He's been struggling, and we thought this was the answer. Armand proposed mediation to avoid a formal eviction process. He sent Miles and Paige a letter outlining 3 conditions: stop subletting immediately, pay all outstanding HOA fines, and issue a written apology for the forgery attempts and harassment. In exchange, I would allow them to remain in the house under the original license terms, with updated language and oversight. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at Armand's office. Miles arrived looking exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't been sleeping. Paige arrived 20 minutes late, dressed like she was going to a business meeting, carrying a leather folder. She sat down, smiled coldly at me, and slid an envelope across the table. We've prepared a counter-proposal, she said. Inside was a document titled Transfer of Property Agreement. My name was already typed at the bottom, with a blank line for my signature. The terms were absurd. I would gift the house to Miles in exchange for continued family access and future grandparent visitation rights. There was no mention of the money I'd spent, the years of support, or the fraudulent refinance attempts. I pushed the envelope back across the table without signing anything. Let me show you the actual numbers, I said. I pulled out a printed spreadsheet showing 5 years of property taxes, insurance premiums, HOA dues, and repair costs. The total was over $73,000. That's what I've paid while you lived there rent-free, I said. How much have you contributed? Miles looked down at his hands. Paige's jaw tightened. We've maintained the property, she said. We've made it a home. You violated HOA rules, tried to forge my signature, and threatened me with estrangement, I replied. That's not making a home. That's taking advantage. Armand stepped in, outlining the legal reality. They had no ownership claim, no equity stake, and no grounds to demand a transfer. The mediation could end with them keeping the license to occupy under stricter terms, or it could end with a formal eviction. The choice was theirs. Paige leaned toward Miles and whispered something I wasn't supposed to hear. But I did. We go scorched earth, she said. Over the next 2 weeks, my life became chaos. My mailbox filled with random subscription notices, junk catalogs, and spam addressed to me at the Cypress Lane house, even though I'd never lived there. Someone had signed me up for dozens of mailing lists using that address. My email inbox exploded with password reset attempts for accounts I didn't recognize. Nadia started receiving invoices for services I'd never authorized: landscaping, pest control, a security system installation. I paid every legitimate bill and documented every fraudulent one. Then the credit union contacted me. Someone had attempted to transfer funds from my personal checking account using stolen login credentials. The transfer was blocked by 2-factor authentication, but the attempt was logged and reported. Armand added it to the file, which was now over 2 inches thick. This is harassment, he said. And it's escalating. We need to move quickly before they do something that can't be undone. He filed a motion to expedite the eviction process based on the documented fraud, harassment, and breach of the license terms. Late one night, there was a knock on my apartment door. I checked the peephole and saw Miles standing alone in the hallway. No Paige. No anger on his face. Just exhaustion. I opened the door and stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like he wasn't sure he was welcome. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd laid out all those trust documents weeks ago. She told me you never wanted me to grow up, Miles said quietly. She said you were keeping me dependent so you could control me. I didn't argue. I pulled out the folder and showed him everything again, the trust deed, the HOA violations, the forged signatures, the credit inquiry, the fraud attempts. I showed him the spreadsheet of what I'd paid. I showed him the timeline of when things had started to go wrong. He stared at the papers for a long time. Then his phone lit up on the table between us. A text from Paige, "Where are you? Don't fall for her guilt trip." He turned the phone over so the screen was face down. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Miles admitted everything. The unauthorized sublets had started 6 months ago when Paige convinced him they could make extra money renting out the guest room on short-term rental apps. She said it wasn't a big deal because you'd never find out, he said. He admitted he'd known about the credit application, though he claimed he didn't know Paige had forged my signature. He thought I'd actually agreed to it. "She showed me an email," he said. "It looked like it came from you, saying you'd approved the refinance." My blood went cold. I never sent that email. Miles pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages with Paige. He found the screenshot she'd sent him and showed it to me. The email looked real, my name, my email address, my usual sign-off. But I'd never written it. I forwarded the screenshot to Armand immediately with a message, "Email impersonation." Paige sent this to Miles pretending it was from me. Then I offered Miles a deal: stop the sublets immediately, help pay the HOA fines, and we'd reset the license terms with clear boundaries. He was nodding, almost agreeing, when his phone buzzed again. Armand's assistant was a tech-savvy paralegal named Quinn Salazar. Within 2 hours, Quinn traced the email headers from the screenshot Miles had shown me. The message hadn't come from my email address at all. It had originated from Paige's laptop, sent through a spoofing service that made it look like my address. The email also included partial digits of my social security number and a forged consent line authorizing the refinance. Quinn documented everything and added it to the fraud packet. We notified the credit union, the county fraud division, and the state attorney general's office. This wasn't just civil anymore. This was criminal. 2 days later, Paige filed a police complaint claiming I was harassing her and Miles, trespassing on their property, and making threatening phone calls. The officer who contacted me sounded skeptical from the start. I invited him to meet me at Armand's office, where we walked him through the trust deed, the forged documents, the email impersonation, and the timeline of Paige's escalating behavior. By the end of the meeting, the officer's tone had completely changed. He logged Paige's complaint and then added ours. The officer, Sergeant Eric Tran, asked me a question I'd been avoiding. "Mrs. Bram, would you like to proceed with removal of the occupants from your property?" I looked at Armand. He nodded slightly, letting me know it was my choice. I thought about Miles sitting at my kitchen table, whispering apologies. I thought about the years I'd sacrificed to give him stability. And I thought about Paige's voice on that recording, "She's out for good." "Yes," I said. "But I want to do it the right way." Armand drafted a cash-for-keys agreement. If Miles and Paige left the house voluntarily within 14 days, returned it in clean and undamaged condition, and signed a mutual non-disparagement agreement, I would pay them $3,000 to cover moving expenses. No eviction on their record. No court battle. A clean break. Miles called me that night. His voice was quiet, defeated. "Paige doesn't want to sign," he said. "She says you're trying to humiliate us." "I'm trying to protect what's mine," I replied. The next morning, the credit union sent Paige a certified letter regarding their fraud investigation into the forged loan application. The 14-day deadline approached. On day 12, Nadia and I arrived at the house with a detailed move-out checklist. Miles answered the door. He looked thinner, older somehow, like the past month had aged him 5 years. The house was mostly clean. The furniture I'd bought for him was still there, but the personal items were gone. The guest room where strangers had stayed was empty, the bed stripped. Miles handed me a single brass key with shaking fingers. "Paige already moved out," he said. "She's staying with her parents." "And you?" I asked. "I got an apartment across town," he said. "Small, but it's mine. Actually mine." We walked through the house together, checking for damage, making notes. Everything was intact. At the front door, I handed him the cashier's check for $3,000 and the signed non-disparagement agreement. He folded the check and put it in his pocket without looking at it. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said again. I wanted to hug him, but I didn't. "Not yet." "I know," I said. A week later, a certified letter arrived at my apartment, addressed to Paige from the credit union's fraud investigation unit. The small claims hearing was scheduled for early November, 6 months after the initial door slam that had started everything. Paige showed up alone with a budget lawyer who looked annoyed to be there. Miles didn't come. The judge reviewed the case file, which included the forged loan application, the email impersonation evidence, the HOA violation records, and the documentation of harassment. Paige's lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that Paige had been trying to help her husband secure their future. The judge wasn't buying it. She ordered Paige to pay the $4,000 in HOA fines I'd covered, plus $1,800 in legal fees directly tied to the fraud investigation and impersonation. She also issued a permanent injunction barring Paige from acting on or making claims about the property. The trust's title was affirmed, and my right to terminate the occupancy license was upheld without question. Outside the courtroom, Miles was waiting by the elevator. He looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and asked, barely audible, "Is there any way back from this?" I didn't answer right away. Finally, I said, "Maybe. But not yet." I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Claudia Hoffman. I'd resisted it for months, thinking I didn't need help, that I was handling everything fine. But the truth was, I wasn't fine. I was angry, hurt, and grieving the relationship I'd thought I had with my son. Dr. Hoffman helped me see that boundaries weren't cruelty. They were survival. You can love someone and still protect yourself, she told me during one session. Those two things aren't in conflict. I decided what to do with the house. I couldn't live there, it held too many painful memories. I couldn't sell it and pretend none of this had happened. So I partnered with a local nonprofit called New Foundations that provided transitional housing for single parents escaping difficult situations. I renovated the house, updating the kitchen and bathrooms, painting the walls soft neutral colors. Then I signed an agreement allowing New Foundations to place families there at below market rent, with support services included. I also established a small scholarship fund in my mother's name, Ruth Bram, who'd taken me in when I'd had nowhere else to go. The first tenant was a young woman named Yolanda Martinez. She was 26, with a 3-year-old daughter named Sophia who clutched a stuffed rabbit everywhere she went. Yolanda had left an abusive relationship 6 months earlier and had been living in a shelter while saving money and rebuilding her life. She worked 2 jobs and was taking online classes to finish her degree. When Nadia introduced us, Yolanda cried and hugged me, thanking me over and over. "You don't understand what this means," she said. But I did understand. I understood what it felt like to need grace, to need someone to believe in you when you were starting over. I handed her the keys to the house and helped her carry boxes inside while Sophia ran through the empty rooms, laughing. That night, I texted Miles a photo of the move-in day, showing Sophia's drawing taped to the refrigerator. He replied hours later with a single line, "That's really good, Mom." 2 weeks after that, He sent me a photo of a therapy intake form with his name at the top. I sent back a red heart emoji. It wasn't forgiveness yet. But it was something. I stood on the porch of the house one last time before handing over full management to new foundations. The same porch where Miles had slammed the door in my face, where I'd stood humiliated and trembling with a casserole dish in my hands. Now the porch light glowed warm and steady, and I could hear Sophia's laughter drifting through the open window. I unlocked the door and carried in a set of fresh towels I'd bought for Yolanda, setting them on the hallway table. "Welcome home," I said, and I meant it. Miles and I met for coffee last month. It was awkward and careful, both of us circling around the hurt that still sat between us. He told me he'd ended things with Paige, that he was working on himself, trying to understand how he'd let things go so far. I told him I was proud of him for going to therapy. I told him I still loved him. But I also told him that love without boundaries had nearly destroyed both of us. My revenge was never about cruelty. It was about ownership, truth, and finally opening a door for someone who truly needed it. The house was always mine. And now, so were my boundaries. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What does family mean to you? Please share below and subscribe to this channel for more stories like mine.